And our next guest is the CEO and founder of Water.org and Water Equity, which is basically an impact investment fund dedicated to ending the water crisis around the globe in our lifetime, focusing exclusively on and developing capital for water and sanitation businesses all across the world, but especially Asia, Africa, and Latin America. He's named to the Time 100 Most Influential People in the World list in 2011. He's named to the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Water, and in 2017, he was awarded the Forbes 400 Lifetime Achievement Award for social entrepreneurship. Please welcome Gary White, and he will be joined in a moment by the head of the water school at FGCU, Greg Tolley. Welcome, Gary. Good to have you here.
So good morning. And thank you, Tyler, for that introduction. I appreciate that. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you today to talk to you about my greatest passion, and that is access to water and sanitation for people living in poverty around the world. Now, as an engineer who runs two nonprofit organizations, you're probably thinking, okay, he's going to talk about how we've got to figure out how to go around the world and drill more wells. And he's going to talk about we just need a whole lot more charity to go and do this. And that used to be my approach, but not anymore. Instead, I'm going to tell you today that there are people living in poverty who don't necessarily need charity to solve their personal water and sanitation crisis. And I'm going to start by telling you the story of the most significant moment in my 3 decades of doing this work. And it's actually not a story about water, but water does figure into it. It's really a story about finance. Now, it was 2003. I was in India for my work, and I was in Bangalore, and back in a slum in Bangalore, and I was talking to the women there about how they meet their water and sanitation needs. And it struck me in particular when they started talking about sanitation, because they told me that what they had to do, they had to wait until the cover of night to go out by the railroad tracks near their community to defecate because of the privacy concerns that they had. And what this did is it subjected them to increased risk of attack. And I was stunned by that. And as I met one woman in particular at her home, a very elderly woman, I noticed that she had a different solution. She actually had built a toilet at her home because she lived up on this steep, kind of rocky cliffside, and she could no longer walk down to defecate at night. It's too dangerous. But I knew that toilet had to cost several $100s, and there's no way she would have been able to pay for that. So I asked her, and she told me she had gone to a loan shark to be able to get enough money for a loan to be able to build that toilet. And as she's telling me about the terms, I did the math, right? And she was paying 125% interest on that loan to the loan shark, 125%. So here's a woman making monthly payments towards a better quality of life, but she'd been left to loan sharks because no one saw her, or as you'll see, millions like her around the world as an investment. But that's starting to change, and that's the bigger story that I want to share with you today. My experience with the woman in Bangalore was a turning point for me. It opened my eyes to the fact that even after working closely with people living in poverty for almost 3 decades, I still had a few big misconceptions about their lives. And it's those misconceptions that were keeping me, like many others, from properly investing in people living in poverty. And you break down those misconceptions, you can open the doors to significant new opportunities with people. A significant opportunity for billions who are fighting to break the cycle of poverty in their lives, and also opportunities for donors and investors. So let's take a look at a few of those misconceptions and try to break them down. The first misconception is best captured by an analogy from the late Hans Rosling. Hans was a doctor, a global development expert, and an author. And he wrote a brilliant best-selling book that I hope you'll have the chance to read. It's called Factfulness. And in that book, Rosling talks about how when you're standing on the top floor of a skyscraper and you look down at the buildings around you, they all seem to be about the same height, whether it's 1 story, 2 stories, or 4 stories. And so likewise, if you happen to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and you hear about people who make $1 or $2 or $4 a day, it all seems about the same. It's practically nothing. So of course, we don't look at these people as being able to pay for water and sanitation. But in reality, going from $1 a day to $2 a day, that's a 100% increase. Going from 2 to 4, it's another 100% increase. And this jump can make more of a difference in people's lives than we might think. More than we can easily see when we are observing their lives from our own elevation. So now consider the water and sanitation crisis from that perspective. Right now, there are more than 785 million people with no safe water access within a 30-minute walk of their home. But think, they're still finding water somewhere, right? I mean, if they weren't, they wouldn't be alive today. The question is, how are they getting it? And what's it costing them? Well, some people, and particularly the women and girls, are walking great distance to water holes and streams, collecting water and carrying it back home on their backs. They're paying for water with their time that could be spent at more productive activities. But other people are actually paying with their money. In urban slums, people tend to pay up front for water that's delivered by these big water trucks that come through the slums, and they're paying a lot for that water. In fact, they're shelling out 10 to 15 times more for that water than if they were connected to the public utility where their middle-class neighbors are getting their water. Also, every day, millions of people pay to use public restrooms. Okay? We call these coping costs, and they're substantial. I've met people who pay 20% of their income just to get water each day. So think about that. For a family in the United States with an average income of $50,000 each year, imagine if your water bill was $10,000. That's the magnitude of what's happening here with people living in poverty, solving and coping with this crisis. What I've come to realize is it's expensive just to be poor. But if someone could give them a loan for a few $100s, they could pay for a permanent solution, like one of those water connections to the utility in their home, or a toilet right on their own property. Life-changing solutions that would cost far less than what they're paying today for coping costs. But as I learned from that woman I met in 2003, no one was offering these loan solutions except the loan sharks. Reputable lenders would not lend because they did not see the potential for cash flow for these water and sanitation loans. They didn't see them like small business loans that they would make and see that cash flow. And they just simply saw them as too risky and that default rates would be too high. That's when I started about 15 years ago to set out to see we are going to find ways to make those lenders make those loans. So people in poverty could get those water and sanitation connections. Now, I did have a good hunch that this was going to work, but I was stunned by how well it did when we put it into action. So you fast forward to today, over 28 million people have now gained access to water and sanitation through these microloans that we set into motion. the recipients are paying them back at a 99% rate. So we have a decade of proof now with many different financial partners in many different countries around the world that for every 100 people who take out these loans, 99 of them pay them back within 2 years. Not only is it true now that many millions of people living in poverty are able to pay back the loans to meet basic needs, it's also true that many of them are moving up and out of extreme poverty because they're better able to invest in solutions like these, because they've built a better life and more economic opportunity because they have safe water and sanitation. This moving up and out of poverty is one of the most significant trends of our lifetime. What if I told you that today, 200,000 people lifted themselves out of extreme poverty? And what if that happened yesterday and the day before? This is what's happening, right? It's every day for the last 25 years, 200,000 people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty. This is the scale of this trend. These people moving out of poverty is the single largest source of untapped economic growth on the planet. So what we see is that people living in poverty aren't always or even necessarily seen as a problem to be solved, but they should be seen as a market to be served. So that is why we at water.org and Water Equity don't just focus on digging more wells. We focus on affordable financing. We correct market failures to meet this tremendous demand for water and sanitation solutions in a number of ways. Two of those are catalytic philanthropy and impact investing. So at water.org, our catalytic philanthropy leverages each dollar 68 to 1. At Water Equity, our impact investments provide an attractive financial return to investors while also delivering big social impact in water and sanitation. Earlier, I noted how over the past few decades, more than 2 billion people have quietly conquered enormous challenges in order to lift themselves out of extreme poverty. As a result, now only 1/2 as many people are living in extreme poverty as they were in 1990. If we invest in people in poverty, we can jumpstart even more of this economic growth and build even greater resilience in poor communities. Every dollar spent on water and sanitation yields $4 in economic impact. Now, investing in them, we invest in all of us. This is why, for all the challenges we are facing at the moment, I also see us as living in a time of incredible opportunity. We have the chance to make sure that no one has to spend life trapped in a constant battle just to meet their basic needs. In any other era, that would be seen as aspiration or even self-delusion. And virtually every other time in human history, we simply had to expect that some would go without food, some would go without shelter, some would go without water, but not anymore. Today, we can work towards meeting the basic needs of everyone, everywhere, if we just change our frame of reference. We can see this today, not as a shared burden, but as an opportunity for shared benefit. That's the spirit behind our work, and I know that that same spirit is here with the people in the room today. We know that by sharing our prosperity, we can grow it for all. Now, I started today by telling you people living in poverty don't need charity to solve their water and sanitation crisis. And that's true, but those misconceptions we just talked about, they stand in the way of prosperous markets for all. And philanthropy is necessary to set all this in motion to correct those market failures. So it's taken me a long time. It's taken me decades to gain these insights that I've shared with you today and to put them into action. And I warned you there might be some unexpected ideas, and I realize there may be some cognitive dissonance with what we're talking about in people living in poverty and these solutions. And that may be a good thing. But I want to thank you for sitting through this crash course with me the past 10 minutes. And I also mentioned up front that this work is my passion. And I wouldn't be doing my job today if I didn't encourage you to join in supporting this work. So consider yourself encouraged. And if I haven't done that yet, give me a shot later and maybe I can convince you. Catch me after the talk. So in closing, I encourage us all to seek out the misconceptions that hold us back and to find our own blind spots. Hopefully you have someone who can help, like that woman in Bangalore helped me. We're all here today to talk about solutions. In my experience, the key to discovering new solutions is to recognize our blind spots. Then what's currently holding us back becomes the insight that we need to move us all forward. Thank you. So, water is both a global and a local issue. And so now we're going to go from the global to something more local here in Florida. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Greg Tolley to join me on stage to discuss his insights and solutions focused right here in Florida. Dr. Tolley is a professor of marine science and chair of the Department of Marine and Ecological Sciences at the Water School at Florida Gulf Coast University. He's the author of numerous publications on marine ecology and physiology, as well as on novel approaches in science education. A certified fisheries professional with the American Fisheries Society, Tolley is acting director of the Florida District of the American Institute of Fisheries Research Biologist. As founding director of the Coastal Watershed Institute, he worked to enhance research on coastal environments in Southwest Florida. Dr. Tolley.
Thank you, Gary.
So we have a few minutes to kind of zoom into the local here in Florida. And I guess I would just start by asking you, what is the biggest challenge that we face with water in the environment in South Florida?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the amazing work you're doing with water.org.
Thank you.
Not only providing water security for tens of millions of people around the world, but lifting them out of poverty at the same time through market-based solutions. That's really creative, and it's very, very clear that a single individual with a group of friends that has passion can change the world. So I applaud you for that. Water security in Southwest Florida looks a little different. We have more first world problems than what you described previously. Water security in Southwest Florida can be clean drinking water and human health. But it's also clean water for healthy ecosystems, which is what brings a lot of us down here in the first place. It's clean water for economic development and growth. And of course, water isn't always our friend. Water can be a problem in terms of floods and droughts, and down here, especially hurricanes and sea level rise.
So I know that it's fairly young, but the Water School, the university, is digging into some of these issues. Why was it so important to form the Water School, and how is it connecting students and faculty to some of the issues in Florida?
Well, I always tell people the job of a university, especially this university, our number one job is for our students. That's our number one responsibility. But our number two responsibility is to our communities. We're at the grocery store shopping with you. We're buying gas at the gas station. We're part of your community. We have the same experiences you have. We just have a little bit different skill sets sometimes. So the Water School is building on over 20 years of work we've been doing at this university since we opened back in 1997. But we're casting our net more broadly now. We realize that these issues that we're facing, many of which are legacy issues we've inherited, because we haven't thought far enough into the future or across local horizons to think about how these things interconnect. And water is, my message is water it's part of a system. And whether the work that you're doing, which is impacted by climate change, for example, or the work we're doing on red tides, which is impacted by human development and freshwater delivery, these things are all connected, and we need to think of them as a system. So this last year, we established the Water School to focus more of an interdisciplinary approach on water issues here in Southwest Florida. For those of you who don't know the area as well as some others, 2019, this time last year, we had just come out of the 5th longest red tide in Florida history. We had a hurricane that was the preamble to that. And then right in the middle of the red tide, we had harmful blue-green algae blooms, which are affecting people across the planet. So this was our Cuyahoga moment. This was our transformational moment, I think. And I think we have these Cuyahoga moments occurring around the world now. We've got fires in Australia and California. We've got droughts in the Midwest. We've got flooding in Mississippi. We've got sea level rise in Miami. So our first speaker today was talking about signs and the importance of recognizing signs. We certainly see those with respect to water.
Yeah, so I think, I don't live in Florida, but my perception from outside looking at these issues is that Florida is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change and how it's going to impact the state and the populations. And I know with a lot of corporations that we talk to, they're afraid of stranded assets, right? So that plant for our situation, right, that might have a water resource now that has $1 billion investment in the plant and infrastructure, that what happens if they run out of water at that plant? All of a sudden, they have to give up $1 billion asset. And it seems like Florida is just that, like, multiplied times 1,000 in terms of all the coastal development. Do you feel the weight on your shoulders here in Florida to solve these issues early so that others around the country and the world actually can learn from you?
Well, I think we're one of many agencies and organizations that's trying to make sure that the United States actually leads the way in this so that we can actually affect change globally. And part of that is through partnerships with businesses and corporations. Part of it's government as well, but a lot of it is grassroots, local citizens, nonprofit organizations, such as the one you started decades ago. So we do feel a little bit of pressure, but that's a good thing to feel. And what we're trying to do is reach out with our local communities and local stakeholders to make sure that we're working on these issues together. Florida is flat, as you probably noticed flying in. It's got $50 billion of real estate that's probably at risk for stranded assets in the coming 20 or 30 years, for example. And Florida is a moving target. We've got about 1,000 people moving to the state per day. So Florida is a challenge because it represents some of the highest pressures that you can experience between sea level rise, hurricanes, population growth, and a topography that's very, very flat. Some of the greatest challenges that you can see in any part of the country. I tell people we're in the right place for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing that I always get encouraged by is the youth coming up and their desire to engage with issues like this. I know with water.org and water equity, we get inquiries all the time of young people coming out of university that want to engage in these issues and roll up their sleeves and help because they know they're the ones that are going to pay the tab, so to speak, a few decades down the road. And you've been doing this for a long time and have been in academia for a long time. What has the trajectory been that you've seen about young people and how they're tuning into issues that you're focused on, and how is that manifesting itself with the water school and students coming in there?
Well, I'm happy to report that our young people these days in our college are, I think, much more familiar with and knowledgeable about climate issues and global issues than I certainly ever was. So it's encouraging from that standpoint. And one of the things we're trying to do at the Water School is not only to give people information, fact-based information, so that we can make our own decisions, whether it comes to the ballot box or where we put our donations, or where we spend our time, for example, but also to train the next generation of future water leaders. And that's going to be very, very important. So I'm encouraged with the amount of interest that our students have these days, oftentimes expressed in their volunteer work and work that they're doing outside their classes to make the world a better place.
So you're leading this initiative at the Water School. I'm curious, how much time do you still get to roll up your sleeves and do the research? And are there some projects specifically that you just are drawn towards right now that you like? I always want to keep a foot into that, the real research aspect of what's going on and discover what's there.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes a sign of success is not getting to do the things you used to like to do. It got you in the first place in the field. My job these days is mostly trying to make sure that the tremendous faculty that we have at the water school and the staff and our students have the best opportunities to be successful in what they do. So my job these days is essentially promoting our research initiatives on sea level rise and climate change. We have a faculty member that's working on, she actually goes back in history by going back in the sediments to look for ancient hurricanes as a proxy for what we might expect in the future. Are we going to see stronger storms, heavier rainfall? And of course, harmful algal blooms is another big initiative we do. So I'm mostly a big cheerleader these days, try and keep my hand in the science a little bit, but we've got great people in the area and we're attracting new people each year to try and address the water issues here in Southwest Florida.
Well, that's great. I think we're out of time, but I just want to kind of bring this back together. I think that, of course, water manifests itself in so many different ways. We can see just the differences, yet similarities in what each of us do, and also the complexity of it, too. And I think that's the other thing that we've learned is like these are complex issues, and they do take deep thinking, and they do take the support of people who are voting at the ballot box or people who are impact investing or donating to these causes to solve for the water issues, because this is going to be, I think, the defining issue. Too much water in too many different places, too little water in others, poor quality water for the ecosystems or for people living in poverty. And we've got to put this at the top of the agenda and solve for water. And I hope everyone in the room here feels that urgency as well. So thank you, Dr. Tolley.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.